Alright, even if you don't like the news, you gotta admit, you have to appreciate the increase in communication we've been getting from Jagex recently. It's a very nice change of pace compared to previous years. So, we recently got more information for what this game health update that Jagex wanted to make in May. Now, ultimately, the scope of what exactly they were talking about hasn't really changed. It still focuses on addressing overtuned loot from a bunch of recent bosses, mostly concerning Elder God Wars, along with a few others like Raksha and the Wilderness Flash events. Ultimately, there's still quite a bit that I think Jagex really needs to do if they really want to commit to these different game health updates. But honestly, I do think, TLDR, this is a step in the right direction. But this is far from over and far from comprehensive. So we'll go over the blog itself. I'll go over my thoughts on individual things and what I've talked about with some people on Reddit, and then give one final bit of, I guess, sort of a mini hotspot adjustment that maybe could address a bridge between certain issues we have. Hint, hint, it's about Proteans, as if the title couldn't give it away. So first off, I really love the massive amount of data that Jagex has given us when it comes to these two blogs. Considering that we're all RuneScape players, data analysis is kind of something that we all obsess about, at the very least to some degree. We as a community love trying to find the most efficient method, the most AFK method, basically taking so much data and trying to compress it down to what is the most efficient, or how lazy can we be. So, showing us all of these data points, where all of the gold was coming from, the percentages of certain items entering the game, this is the type of thing that we really do need to see more of. So hopefully whenever Jagex does more of these sorts of changes in the future, or talks about these sorts of data points, start off with these data points. Start off just guns blazing with the hard facts and data, because this is the type of thing that we really do love to see, and it really does illustrate the point of why some of these updates are necessary. After all, basically, roughly 80-ish%, give or take, of the amount of gold entering the game does seem to come from mostly bossing. Now granted, what we get isn't specifically for boss drops, it's more so just alchables, but bosses really are the prime perpetrators of bringing alchables into the game. So being able to address this with some concern should be the top priority. It's also just one of those things where Reddit also seems to really harp on microtransactions. Like, even after looking at this data point, there are so many people that see 3.5% of gold entering through Treasure Hunter as if that is the bigger focus that should be taken into account. Which, I don't know. It's one of those things that I addressed when we saw this game health update the first time around. Treasure Hunter is not the source of gold inflation. It is still a problem, just not with direct money. And don't worry, we'll go over that in a bit. But it is one of those things where just seeing this hard data, seeing what exactly it is that Jagex is seeing, and showing that information to us. Bravo, Jagex! Keep doing these sorts of hard data, we love to see it. Now, in terms of the actual nerfs, actually getting hard data on these is also really nice, so just more of an extension from that. It is one of those things that, just looking on Reddit, there is a lot of concern when it comes to Iron Man accessibility. And I think the unfortunate consequence is that you basically have to sacrifice either main accounts or Iron Man accounts. Either main accounts basically have access to these items and their prices just crash to the ground, or it becomes a lot harder for Iron Man to be able to get certain types of materials. So when it comes to the inert adrenaline crystals and cyanic scales, a lot of those are basically being removed entirely from a lot of either their more lucrative sources or their common sources. Both in some cases like Zuck. So on one hand, it does suck when it comes to Iron Man accounts, but it is one of those things where when you're trying to address issues in the overall game economy, Iron Men are all about being self-sufficient. So when your focus is on general game economy, when your focus is specifically on main accounts, unfortunately Iron Men do get caught in the crosshairs, which is a little bit unfortunate. One interesting point though, and I even talked to some people on Reddit about this as well, is when it comes to cannonballs, more specifically. Adrenaline crystals and cyanic scales were kind of the big topics, but cannonballs were also a pretty big point of discussion when it come to some of the drops that were getting nerfed. Basically, people didn't want to see cannonballs be nerfed in terms of how many are entering the game, considering how much they are being used. And I even remember talking to some people about some of their solutions. I remember one wanted to basically make an invention machine. Another person wanted to have more cannonballs being made by using higher metals in the creation process. I basically came and said, why not do both? Because having a bunch of metals makes no sense if you're still making just basic cannonballs. And invention is just a real good cop-out to just say, oh, it's divine energy that transmutes it into steel, and you can basically use actual alchemy to turn these higher tiered metals into a lot of steel that then just goes and compresses into making cannonballs. But it's one of those things where throughout the day, it almost kind of seems ridiculous that we were all talking about this, because the whole point of this update is basically to try to lay the groundwork to make skilling more profitable. That is ultimately the core crux of this. Part of this is also to fix the economy and gold entering the game, but part of it is also meant to help make skilling more profitable. Because a lot of people really don't see skilling as a way to adequately make money. Everything is just PVM. Everything is just bossing. Skilling is just a barrier to reach bossing, whether it comes to getting certain materials or meeting prerequisites when it comes to quests. A lot of people don't treat skilling as its own thing. They just treat it as a barrier to entry. So part of this is to make skilling more profitable in that regard. And when it comes to the cannonballs, it's just one of those things where, yeah, some of these things can be helpful in order to address supply issues, but you can also just make more money because there's less supply. So it's just one of those things that was kind of interesting just trying to think about it. Now, while I think that overall all of this data point, all of this transparency is overall a really good thing, I do think that it is important to emphasize that for the stated purpose of this update, this is not enough. There are 3 aspects when it comes to this general game health update to help make a more healthy economy and in some ways trying to improve skilling. Addressing overabundance in skilling supplies and gold influx from bosses, that is one aspect. But there are still the other 2 aspects that were not addressed here. I wasn't expecting changes for these other 2 aspects to be addressed here, considering that that would have likely expanded the scope of this specific update. But the other 2 aspects that do still need to be addressed is demand for skilling items and microtransactions' role in all of this. Treasure Hunter, while it's not a main culprit of gold entering the game, is still a massive problem when it comes to demand for a lot of skilling items. After all, if the whole point and a lot of the philosophy of players is skilling is just a barrier to bossing, then it makes no sense to interact with skilling in any capacity, which means you just gotta get the XP somewhere. So the main issue still is, how do you address microtransactions that bypass this interaction altogether? Now, if you've watched any of my hotspots, you'll know that I have tried to take into account certain suggestions that do try to address either influx of money, or just trying to redirect things in order to increase demand. My video of Dorgish Khan kind of deals with transmuting invention materials, so you can disassemble more of just the random junk to try to get better stuff. There's also the salvage shop, which redirects salvage into just being an alchable into another currency. There's also managing Menaphos, which is just basically a gold sink. But one thing that we really do need to address is microtransactions, and I really hope that sometime in the next few months, maybe around September or October, Jagex can do basically a part 2 of this game health update and address microtransactions' role in it. Now, I hold firm that the best way that you can address some of these concerns is to simply stop introducing Proteans in any capacity. Yes, you still have lamps, yes, you still have stars, yes, you still have skilling dummies. But you gotta start somewhere. And short of just getting rid of Treasure Hunter altogether, which is really not something I foresee happening anytime soon, if ever, addressing Proteans is gotta be the first step. Now, like I said, stopping introducing more of them would be the best way to do it. But rather than just harping on that and it likely not really being an option, just like people just shouting get rid of all Proteans altogether really isn't an option. Kind of a mini hotspot discussion that I would want to try to do is, how can we change Proteans to then make them at least part of the economy? One of the ways that Proteans are so heavily used is the fact that they are entirely separated from the main economy. You just get the item, you use it, you get a crap ton of XP. That is essentially how Proteans work. You don't need any inputs, you don't get any outputs, you just get pure XP. So what if we tried changing that philosophy a little bit? Rather than it being just a pure form of XP without anything, what if we at least tied it to the economy? What if you at least still needed an input to get the XP output? At least in this way, Proteans can serve as a sort of item sink and at least have some role in the economy, rather than trying to address XP rates from them, which, while that could also be something that could be looked into, is also not something I really foresee happening. If we at least make Proteans and transform them into something that serves as a little bit more of an item sink, especially for more desired items, at the very least, that then increases demand for certain items. Now, I've kind of gone and looked to see what exactly we could do to create more of these item sinks for Proteans. Now, some of them do basically have a Protean version of specific items, like the meat all has different tiers of fish, the potions have all different tiers of potions. Rather than just following that, because one, not all Proteans have that, so it wouldn't be applicable to certain ones, and two, that's just a lot of variety, so an actual sink of anything will not be efficient. What I want to try to propose is, essentially, when you get a Protean item, you get an unactivated version of it. And ideally, this would also encompass all existing Protean items, where they all become this unactive version. In order to activate these Protean items, you need to give it a certain item that would then activate it. And from there, you can just use it and you would get the same effect that you can get normally. Basically, I listed each Protean and then created 3 tiers of items that you would then need to use it on. So you have a low tier, which would encompass levels 1 to 29, a mid tier, which encompasses levels 30 to 69, and a high tier, which encompasses 70 plus. Now, not all the items are going to be within the same band. Some are going to be on the lower end of that band, some are going to be on the higher end of that band. But the point is that because this is mostly a mainscape item anyway, if you can't get the item yourself, you can then buy it off the Grand Exchange. Or if you're too lazy to really do that, it then serves as a bit of a gold sink as well as an item sink. But if you do get the items yourself, then you're then interacting with the skill itself, so then that way you are actually playing the game. So what exactly would these items be to activate each of these proteins? Well, to activate protean planks, on the low tier, you would need 2 oak planks for each protean plank in order to activate it. In the mid tier, that then goes into 2 teak planks, and on the high tier, you'd need 2 mahogany planks. For the protean, the low tier would require 2 shrimp, mid tier would require 2 monkfish, and the high tier would require 2 rocktail. For protean hides would be 2 hard leather on the low tier, 2 black hide on mid tier, and 2 royal hide on the high tier. For the protean essence, you would need 10 of any elemental rune, as long as it's all of one type, so 10 air, water, earth, or fire, just as long as it's all of the same type of rune. The mid tier would require 10 chaos runes, and the high tier would require 10 soul runes. For memories, low tier is 10 pale memories, mid tier is 10 sparkling memories, and the high tier is 10 luminous memories. Bars, low tier is 2 iron bars, mid is 2 rune bars, high is 2 bane bars. Logs, you get a bit of a choice. For the low tier, it's either 2 logs or 2 regular wood spirits. Mid tier is U logs or U wood spirits, again, quantity of 2. And the high tier is 2 magic logs or 2 magic wood spirits. The shakes get a little bit interesting, in which you need the 3-dose versions of each of these. For the low tier, it's 2 attack potions, mid tier is 2 super restores, and the high tier is 2 Ceradomin brews. For protean traps, low tier is raw bird meat, quantity of 2, mid tier is 2 raw paya meat, and high tier is 10 Grenwall spikes. And finally we get to the protean cogs, which is the only one in this suggestion that is going to be cumulative. So on the low tier, you would need 10 simple materials and 10 junk in order to activate the protean cog. The mid tier is both of those, as well as 10 stave components. And the high tier is all of that, plus 10 delicate components. Now, when it comes to the unstable ones, we could just go with the same thing, since they do offer similar experience as long as it's not double XP. Or if we want to keep with the aesthetic that they are unstable, then it would require half of these materials. So anything that required 2 items would only need 1, and anything that required 10 items would only need 5. Again, this is items that would need to be consumed per protean. So let's say that you are making 1,000 protean shakes. If you're over level 70, you would also need 2,000 3-dose Ceradomin brews. So you're going to create quite a bit of a sink for a lot of these things, and in some of these cases, a lot of the items that I tried to pick are stuff that really does need a sink. Ceradomin brews require crushed bird nests. Bane bars can be made with Bane ore, which we have a plentiful enough of Bane stone spirits that we need to get rid of. Magic logs are also quite abundant. So basically, the whole point of creating these inactive states is essentially to provide an item sink for a lot of these different items and actually tie proteins into the economy in some way. Again, the whole point is to either get players to engage with the content or to act as both a money and an item sink. Now, I didn't want to make these too prohibitive, because the whole point is to still make sure that they are still lucrative microtransaction items, which I know sucks, but short of getting rid of it, we're just going to have to create changes that still make Proteans good. And the nice thing is that this isn't even something that's unheard of. Protean item effects have changed in the past. Before, Protean memories didn't need to be used at a crater. You could just use them from a bank, and they would act the same way as like the hides or the shakes. Protean planks used to just be a catch-all for any sort of plank, and you could use it at Fort 4 and 3, you could use it at construction contracts, you could use it to create flat packs, but those are changed so that way they react similarly to the essence and also now the memories. So changes to Protean uses have happened in the past. So I'm hoping that maybe instead of just eliminating them or stopping them from being introduced, if that's just not something that corporate will allow, then at the very least we can try to change things just a bit, so that way we can at least make Proteans a source of demand. Again, I don't really like the prospect of keeping Proteans in the game, but if they have to stay in the game, at the very least we can try to make them work with this sort of game health update, because something needs to be done about them. Now granted, this doesn't impact lamps, stars, and dummies. This is only something that I'm going with Proteans, since I believe Proteans are the main culprit when it comes to effect on demand. However, I do think they are also the most likely thing that can be adjusted. Stars and lamps are really hard to try to change without just severely impacting Treasure Hunter as a whole, so making any changes to that is likely going to be very difficult, if not impossible to do. And dummies really aren't too effective, but I feel like that has a much less pronounced presence in terms of how disruptive they are to the economy compared to Proteans. So that was basically the main focus of kind of this mini little hotspot here. Overall, I do think that these changes are necessary, and hopefully we'll be able to see some improvement to these items. In fact, if they are rarer, then we will see their prices increase, and even if they may not hit the prices that they currently are now, at the very least, with time, they can get back some of the value that was lost. But this is far from a problem that can be solved using one update. We all know this, Jagex knows this. It's just something that I hope gets addressed sooner rather than later, because the longer Jagex takes to address any sort of concerns with microtransactions, the more that people really distrust them. It doesn't take long venturing through Reddit to really see people's disgust with microtransactions and truly believe that even an actual game health update is nothing more than just a nefarious method to get people to buy keys and bonds. So, addressing microtransactions soon should be their next step. It will take time for them to be able to develop a course of action, but I hope to see some sort of game health update that takes microtransactions in concern, hopefully around September or October. I think that would be a good time to, at the very least, send out this proposal, even if an update that addresses it doesn't happen until early 2026. At the very least, Jagex does need to address this multi-pronged approach that really needs to be done if they truly are committed to the general health and well-being of the game. So that's my take on everything, but what do you guys think? Do you think that these changes are too heavy-handed still? Do you think it unfairly punishes Iron Man a bit much? Do you think these changes to Proteans are acceptable? Or do you have your own ideas about Proteans that isn't just getting rid of them entirely, that could go some way into addressing the greater game health and economy? Leave a comment below, and I'll see you guys whenever there's another blog that comes out. So until next time, everyone, take care.